And I have read it, and it is very exciting. So we're looking forward to your presentation on this subject.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the report writing team, who this presentation will focus on. It's a slight change of direction. This is focusing on the broader picture of livestock and sustainable agricultural development, but of course there's a large range of problematic issues around sustainable livestock development, and antimicrobial resistance is very rapidly emerging as an important issue. So although the report doesn't focus in great depth on AMR, in this presentation I will draw out some of those messages. For a quick review, this report was produced by what is called the High-Level Panel of Experts, which was set up in 2010 to provide independent evidence-based advice to the Committee of Food Security. The Committee of Food Security is that part of the UN which focuses on the review and follow-up of food security policies, and was established around about 1974. So this HLPE has worked on several different topics. For each set of topics, it's, for example, fisheries, smallholders, waste, different aspects of food security, and each aspect, a group of independent scientific experts are convened, and they are responsible for writing the report, but then it is reviewed, and the final version is an output of the CFS. So the reason this report was commissioned was because of the great power for good and bad of the livestock sector. So livestock is very important in terms of global agriculture. It is the single most valuable commodities, agricultural commodities are now livestock products. Around a third of global agriculture value consists of livestock. But it's also not just important from an economic perspective, but also a livelihood perspective. More than 1 billion poor people depend to a greater or lesser extent on livestock, and they depend on them for income, but also for nutrition, for security, for livelihoods, as a way to guarantee loans. Draft power is still very important in many countries, and of course animal waste is not a waste product to many, but a very valuable input to soil fertility. So livestock is very important with good aspects and bad aspects, and put together this makes a rather interesting and dangerous cocktail, because people advocate very strongly on some sides. Some people are very passionate, either for livestock or against livestock, and that makes it quite a difficult challenge to negotiate your way through this very busy arena of advocates. Of course, in terms of sustainability, livestock is also very key as the major user of land resource, and including, very relevant to our topic today, water resource, and a major producer of greenhouse gases. You all know this, I just touch on it lightly. But very importantly, livestock is a sunrise sector. Agriculture itself is increasing, but the livestock sector is increasing much faster than the rest of agriculture. And the reason for this is basically demand, and demand-driven changes are very difficult to do anything about. So there's all sorts of interest now in changing people's diets, so they stop eating beef and only eat chicken, or they stop eating animal source foods and become vegetarians. But when we actually look at the track record for massive changes in people's consumption behavior, it's absolutely poor. We really do not have the skills and tools to do this. So that is something we have to think about. Stopping demand-driven revolutions or altering them is challenging. And almost all this increase in demand is coming from developing countries. Kenya, where I'm based, back in 1900, which wasn't so very long ago, had 1.5 million people. Now there are around 50 million people, and in 2100, when some of you may still be alive, there will be 160 million people. So going from 1 million to 160 million in what is basically a couple of people's lifetimes creates a lot of demand and a lot of pressure on natural resources. And it's not just population increases, it's also urbanization and changing patterns in consumption, all of which sort of put up a what we are fear maybe a kind of an irresistible tsunami towards increased demand, and whether people in Sweden eat one egg less or one egg more is really not going to have any effect, because all of this demand is coming from developing countries. So what do we do about it? Well, demand is good in itself because people need to be fed, and they need to be fed properly, and 2 billion people, as Ulf said, suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, and animal source foods are a very good way of correcting these. Many children are stunted. In Kenya, 30% of children are stunted, and if these children had greater access, especially to milk, milk is a potent way of growing children and has effects on height well beyond its nutritional value. So we do need, some groups of people need more animal source foods, and a lot of people need less. But I want to focus this presentation on the people who need more, because they are often the ones who get forgotten. We sort of talk about different groups of people: the worried well, which is often us in the room; the hotspots, the rapidly industrializing Southeast Asia and Asia; and the cold spots, the neglected parts of Africa and Asia, where malnutrition, stunting, micronutrient deficiencies are huge problems. Going to the question of AMR, I mean, the problem with this demand-driven revolution is we are going to get likely more livestock, more intensification. But we have a double burden. Nutritionists talk about the double burden, which is when you see hand in hand obesity and non-communicable diseases going hand in hand with stunting and micronutrient deficiency and wasting. So how do we tackle this when you've got two opposite problems going at the same time in the same place? And we are particularly at the International Livestock Research Institute, where I work, we're particularly concerned about the people who don't have enough antibiotics. Everybody else is really concerned about everyone who has too much and is using too much, but we mustn't forget that there are 1 billion poor livestock keepers who are every year losing animals in ways which could be prevented by better animal health care. And what's more, their access to antibiotics in places in Africa, this is from my studies in West Africa, so much of Africa, farmers get their antibiotics through this route, which is just informal traders, because there isn't an animal health system that will reach all the way through to the farmers. And of course, these antibiotics are not necessarily come along with good advice, good storage, accurate diagnosis. But as I said, and every year animals are dying from preventable diseases. So we have to be careful when we try and reduce the overuse of antimicrobials, that we don't do it in a way that is going to block off the access for these animals to antimicrobials. But at the same time, this demand-driven revolution is leading to massive intensification of agriculture in other parts of developing countries. And remember I said there's the hot spots, the cold spots. So these are the hot spots. Places like Vietnam, China, India, where you're seeing rapid increase in intensification, rapid increase in antimicrobial use. You've seen, others have mentioned, so I won't dwell, but you know, some countries, China, USA, Thailand, have very high usage of antibiotics. Others have very low usage, including Sweden, but also including Kenya. So while some developing countries are where we need them to be, in others they are not. And this is largely driven by poultry and pigs, because that is where the intensification is coming, and that is where the antimicrobial use is coming. But these systems, which are the best in terms of producing large amounts of meat for the urban poor, they're the best in reducing greenhouse gases per unit of livestock product produced. They're the worst in terms of using antimicrobials, and they're the worst in producing pollution, emerging diseases, and animal welfare. So we have a contradiction again, another contradiction. Do we move towards intensification because of nutrition and greenhouse gases? Do we move away because of diseases and welfare? What this report had done is to try and bring together the evidence on the goods of livestock, the bads of livestock, the different camps, the people who want more, the people who want less, and to try and show that actually this is not all incompatible, that things can be done if we think about it in a strategic way, so that it's not a one-size-fits-all, that solutions are carefully developed in their context and tailored for their contexts. An important message was that sustainability is not just greenhouse gases or perhaps water use. In thinking of sustainability, we need to think about For sure, the natural resources upon which all of human life ultimately relies, but also upon the resilience of ecosystems and societies, and also about social equity and supporting cultures and improving transparency, governance, and equity, both between men and women and across societies. So, by taking this into consideration, using this as the roadmap of how we decide who has too much and who has too little, and where something must be encouraged and where it must be discouraged, this helped us to develop various recommendations. In the interest of time, I won't go through them one by one, but basically, key messages are that livestock are too important to be left out. There's a saying that health is too important to be left to doctors. Well, we say livestock are too important not to be part of the sustainable agriculture. That there is both, as I said, both goods and bads, and these needs to be managed. A very important message was the importance of women. Firstly, as keepers of livestock, but also as the major players in the traditional processing, retail, and consumption within house of livestock products. And in the end, we found that too much of policy, too much of previous approaches had been push. It had been, how do we regulate our way to sustainability? And in developing countries, we need good policy and regulation, but we cannot rely on regulation to solve these problems. We have to look at demand and consumer attitudes. As I said, this was a broad series of recommendations. Some apply to AMR, some apply more to the whole livestock sector. And I encourage all of you who have an interest in livestock and sustainable development to download the report, which can be found at the HLPE. There is an ongoing consultation. There was an extensive consultation during the process of the report, where we had inputs from everyone from PETA to Nestle, and it was not always the same message they wanted us to incorporate in the report. And now the report has been published, and there is going to be a further consultation, and we hope the final report will then be useful for policy setting among all the countries who rely on livestock. Thank you.